I realized that your ideas could be applied in different ways, in different industries, and have different types of contribution.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Devers, and this is Clever. Today, I'm talking to Dror Benshetrit. Dror is a multidisciplinary designer, artist, activist, and futurist who has recently launched Supernature Labs, a regenerative design and technology organization that seeks to trigger a massive change in the built environment by building communities like nature and with nature for the benefit of all life. What does this mean exactly? Well, you'll hear all about it in our talk. But in essence, it's a new approach to urban planning and construction that shifts cities from the traditional Cartesian grid to a more adaptive cellular planning model, allowing urban and building design to be more biophilic, biomimetic, regenerative, and community-oriented. It's complex and rigorous, and it is as hopeful as it is urgently important. Prior to dedicating his life to Supernature Labs, Dror made a name for himself designing many critically acclaimed projects across the fields of furniture, products, interior, architecture, urban planning, and public installation, including the Peacock Chair for Capellini, the quad-drawer structural support system, and a residential master plan for Nurai, a private island off the coast of Abu Dhabi. All of this experience has made for a fascinating life and has resulted in a passionate and driven advocate for ecological harmony. Here's Dror.
I'm Dror Benshetrit. I'm based between New York and Miami. I'm a designer, futurist, activist, artist, kind of involved in a bunch of different things, mainly focusing right now on our new venture, Supernature Labs.
That's a lot to unpack there, all of those things, all those hats you wear. Let's go way back to before you even were wearing any hats, though. I like to start with the formative years. Can you tell me where you were born, what your hometown was like, your family dynamic, and the things that you were fascinated by in your youth?
That's an interesting one. So I grew up in Tel Aviv. As a little kid, I was always creating. I was always interested in art. I was always either building something or drawing something. I constantly remember imagining things and finding ways to articulate those ideas, and always been using all kinds of medium to do that, whether it's building puppetry or sculptures or sketching, drawings. I've always been attracted to this like mixed media, this different tools to utilize to create my ideas, my thoughts.
Were you in a creative family or were you kind of an outlier? I
do like to think of both my parents as extremely creative, but not really practicing it. I think that it's only very, late in my 20s that I realized that the combination of both my mom and my dad's talent is a reflection of what I'm doing, but none of them were practicing art or other creative forms.
Was there a general environment of encouragement for these creative endeavors, these sculptures and puppetry? I'm really excited to hear about the puppetry, actually. Did you have brothers and sisters that you could do this with, or are you on your own doing this?
Yeah, I have only one sister that is 6 years younger than me. We were not very close in our childhood, obviously because of the age difference. But those creations have always been me, on my own. But in terms of encouragement, absolutely. They've been very supportive. Besides the fact that from a very young age, I was a part of an art program in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art. For me, I think it was an extremely important aspect of my life. I spent several days every afternoon going to the museum and learning from different artists that were providing, I don't know if to call it mentorship or inspirational guidance, but it was all based on personal exploration. I've been very, very fortunate to be part of this unique program in Israel that was selecting, a small group of kids and giving them a scholarship to study under this program.
That sounds like a dream come true. If only all children had access to something like that, don't you think the world would look so different?
Oh my God, absolutely. I'm so grateful for those years. It's been extremely unique. And I think that, growing up even at those ages, you simply realize that your childhood is quite different than your other classmates and peers. And I agree. I think it's a huge privilege that I got that I wish the whole world would have access to.
Do you find that having access to a program like that also kind of, in those formative years, would have had to have had an impact on how your brain processes information and how you see the world?
For sure. Even just the environment of Tel Aviv Museum of Art, which is an incredible museum, just walking inside of that space, walking inside of that building every single day, sometimes after hours where nobody else is in the museum, and have this intimate relationship with those pieces, it's incredible.
So one sibling who's 6 years younger than you, and you're the oldest. So that means you had to be the pioneer of the teenage years in your family. What were you like in adolescence? And were you rebellious and angsty, or were you just kind of driven and on a path? How were you expressing your creativity?
Early on, I definitely was an introvert. I spent a lot of time by myself. I just loved diving into my world of imagination. I think it was only through high school that I kind of developed my creative social friends, that an interesting creative exchange happened with like-minded people of my age. And prior to that, it was pretty much only through that program. And I would say that with my parents, it was never a significant dialogue. You know what I mean? They kind of left me to do what I do. They find it special. They found it unique, and they embrace it by just letting it be.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It's a sort of Dror's doing his thing, and we have no problem with him doing his thing, but we also can't really engage him on a deep level about it.
Yes, something like that.
So what were the college years like for you? And did finding a kind of creative exchange with people the same age, your kind of social tribe in high school, did that convince you that that's where you belonged and also kind of support your decision to study design?
Obviously a gap between high school and university, which is the Israeli army, for 3 years. And pretty much during high school, it was very clear to me that I'm going to be an artist. And I knew that I'm giving, the Israeli army 3 years of my life, and then I'm moving on with my own path. But something really interesting happened, which during the army service, I started to realize that I'm still applying the same creative thinking, but the expression of that was no longer drawings and sculptures, but they were tools and educational, maquettes and models, demonstration elements. And I realized that I'm actually designing. So I kind of seeked to understand a little bit more what it means. And my first realization was, okay, so this is essentially art with function. What do I think of that in terms of my future career? Do I want to get into art with function, or do I want to continue to do what I've done before? And I was just fascinated by how you can influence people's well-being, quality of life through the use of creativity in a more direct way. So after the army, I started looking for both art school and design schools. And I was just fascinated by design because that was kind of new and different to me from everything else. And I decided to go to the Design Academy in Eindhoven, which was until today, I'm so grateful for that experience. I think it was one of the most important choices I've made, simply because it was, and it still is, an extremely artistic school, extremely conceptual, and also a school that you really discover yourself, finding ways to deliver on your own inspiration. I often design for the things that I want to see in the world because I feel strongly about their needs, regardless of, the type of discipline that they belong into. That particular school gave me such a deep understanding on how to accomplish different things by collaborating with specialists and people that have the unique knowledge and capabilities to take it to where it needs to be.
So what are the highlights and the projects that really shaped you professionally between college and now? You started your studio in New York City at 25, so that's pretty young. Did you feel naive, or it just seems like that takes a lot of moxie?
The word naive is an interesting one because, at least for me, I'm always naive, right? At different levels of my life, at different kind of points, I'm always naive. And I think that that's what gets me going, right?
Yeah, I think if we knew what was involved in a lot of stuff, we'd be really intimidated. But not knowing what we don't know, it seems so exciting.
Exactly. So, it started with, with a broken vase, and it went all the way to, large urban planning and master planning challenges. There has been a lot of benchmarks and kind of defining moments in my career. Obviously, my very first product that I put in the market, which was the vase of phases for Rosenthal, was extremely influential on my career in many, 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 many ways. It was essentially an expression of my own feeling at that time. I really felt my naivete was broken by moving to New York and trying to build a practice, right? And being a young kid coming from the countryside of Eindhoven in the Netherlands, moving to New York City, thinking that doors will just open and, you just walk in, and and obviously it wasn't like that. It was very challenging, but the Vase of Phases received such an incredible attention and was a huge success, both, commercially for Rosenthal and both from a publicity standpoint for me in the practice. And it also came with a very interesting understanding of design responsibility. For me, this project was about talking about the beauty in experience and the beauty in taking ourselves through certain particular experiences that shaping us to become who we are, which never stop being relevant, right? And will never, ever stop becoming relevant. It's funny for me that still until today, 20 years later, I sometimes start my lectures and talks with the Vase of Phases as an example of creating a connection between human and products. That was one. The Peacock Chair for Capellini was also a very important project for me that actually was born in a very, very, very similar way to the Vase of Phases. It was a personal experience. It was a personal story. It was about a breakup with a girlfriend and how do I express that in a piece of art, in a chair, in this case. At that point also, I was obsessed with transformation. I used to kind of almost divide my practice into two, the physical transformation, object and product that actually physically transform, and metaphorical transformation, things like the vase that, are essentially about evolution of change. And the Peacock Chair kind of sits in between because the folding of the sheets of felt, because of this kind of approach that I took, does not require any traditional upholstery technique or glue or anything else, just the pressure of one metal band all around. So for me, that was a transformation of form, but not a physical transformation of point A to point B. It was a transformation through the process. And that made me realize for the first time, okay, there's also that, right? There's also that kind of way of looking at transformation. And that brought me into a whole other world of fascination with physics and structures and material. And I think another huge defining point was the creation of Quadror, which is this 4 identical elements that connects together to form a structural system that also kind of articulate and open from a flat state to a 3-dimensional state. And I've been obsessed with this geometry for several years, looking at more and more applications that this geometry can be beneficial, from sawhorses to a table, all the way up to structural support system for architecture, and exoskeleton for homes, and sound barriers for highways, and many other applications.
It's fascinating, and it does sound like you are both gifted with connecting the human experience to the expression in an object, but also very much a systems thinker and able to distill things down to a modular essence that can then be, I mean, this is essentially what Quadror is, can then be used in so many different applications, in so many different materials for so many different reasons.
Right.
I'm curious professionally, you know, the Vase of Phases was really successful, but how were you able to convince people to work with you on like architectural projects and city planning projects after that? How did you not get stuck in doing product?
That's a really good one. So Eric Chen, which has been somebody that wrote about my work for many years since the beginning, and he's also wrote the introduction to my recent book with Monticelli. He once came to the studio and said, "Dror, you know, your work is very architectural." And I didn't really know what it meant. I went home and kind of his voice kept coming up in my head, and I thought, why is he saying that? Because I like playing with structures and with physics. And at that point, architecture was not part of my practice. I loved already at that stage to say that I work comprehensively across different design typologies and scale, but I wasn't doing any architecture at that time. But because of that comment, I started thinking of architectural ideas in the same system approach that I often think with. So I came up with a series of architectural concepts, and then I just showed it to a few people. One of those people that I showed it to was at the time a real estate marketeer and broker, now a very successful developer, Michael Schwo. And he said, "I'm going to get you your first architectural commission, and we're going to have to make sure that you have the knowledge and the support system around you to execute that project." He said, "Do you think you can handle a 7-story building?" I said, "Sure," not knowing obviously what I'm getting into, but assuming that, you know, at that time I had no formal education in porcelain making or orthopedic making with, you know, collaboration with Puma or, you know, any other aspect. It's for me, design is a very collaborative effort. And I said, sure, you know, we're going to, you know, find the people to support the conceptual, the creation, and pad us with what we need. He called me back and said, "Dror, I have a 25-story building for you. Do you think you can handle that?" And that was our first commission. I mean, actually, that building did not get built. It broke ground. And then the financial crash of 2008 happened. But the process...
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, well, part of the design experiences, right? And architecture. But what's interesting is that the process was so unique and so different that Michael actually got us our second architectural commission, which was the Nurai Island in Abu Dhabi. That project, you know, was our first built architectural commission. We had, an amazing support system of collaborators. And what was interesting for me is that the starting point was a very naive, poetic approach to an experience, right? Like I could not stop thinking about the fact that the client said, think about the most, luxurious homes you can possibly imagine in an island setting. And they wanted like 30 of them. And I said, well, that's not very luxurious to live in a line of other houses and being number 17 and 16 on your left and another, 12 on your right. So I said, this idea that living on an island and having the privacy to feel as if you're the only person on the island, while simultaneously you have a community, but the community is not visible, is very similar to, let's say, a luxury hotel where the service is done so seamlessly that you throw a towel and you look back and it's hanged back on the hanger, right? So this is where we came up with this idea of the green carpet and presented it as a very childish concept of shoving everything underneath the carpet and appropriating the carpet as a symbol of the Persian Gulf, saying carpet making is originally from here. Why don't we treat the entire island as a giant carpet of vegetation? So that was in 2007, and the client fell in love with the approach and called us back and said, the Crown Sheik wants to build your vision. And I started laughing hysterically, and I said, I really have no idea how to build this. And and they said, we know. We've done, our homework on the size of your team and your experience, and we will pad you with the knowledge that you're lacking. And I just loved hearing that, because that was the premise of the practice, is we constantly pad ourselves with the knowledge that we're lacking to make sure that we can execute on our visions. So hearing that at that stage, being project number 2 in our architectural practice, was very refreshing and very exciting. And this project ended up breaking the records of the most expensive residential ever sold in the UAE at that time. It was also, a huge scale for us. I mean, the total project was north of $1 billion. And at that time, my portfolio was a few chairs and some tabletops, and, you put all of them together and they're still quite far from $1 billion. So that's when I realized that your ideas could be applied in different ways, in different industries, and have different types of contribution. And this is when I really fell in love with public art and with large architectural commissions.
That's a perfect segue into Supernature Labs. From what I've read, it's a global alliance of designers, architects, urbanists, city futurists, engineers, neuroscientists, strategists, technologists, and activists, all addressing the need for regenerative urban communities across the globe. So, hallelujah.
That sounds good.
Well, yeah, right? I think I read that from your press release. So.
Yeah, I don't know if we're all the way there yet. This is what we're striving to accomplish. And I think that we are, making major headways towards that global alliance.
Well, let's start with the mission. Why did you feel the need to put together a collective like this and really start to amass a coalition of people who want to approach building communities in a more regenerative way?
So 2 things really led to that. Well, actually, maybe a few more. Turning 40, almost 5 years ago now, been a huge reflection point in my career, where I guess everybody at this age kind of think like, okay, what have I accomplished so far? What's my plan for the future? And I found myself asking a very, very, very different question than I typically ask before. It's always been like, okay, we've done this, and this. What should we do next? And all of a sudden I found myself asking, well, what does the world needs the most? And the answer flew out. I found myself sitting down for about 4 days, nonstop writing what now I call the Supernature Manifesto, which really has been me understanding that the future of the built environment needs to change, and we cannot build cities the way that we have been doing for, the last several decades. It was born from a couple of different things. One is this understanding that the way that we treat each other, the way that we treat ourselves, our relationship with money, our relationship with consumption is all just going in a very, very, very challenging path. And I think that the built environment have a huge contribution to that. Obviously, living in New York for 20 years, first loving the city for the incredible access that you have to absolutely everything, right? Culture and people of different kind, this beautiful melting pot. But at some point you realize that this grid system of New York might seem simple, might seem easy to find your way around, but also creates a very aggressive environment, also creates a very aggressive behavior from people that spend a lot of time in it. And the reason is, obviously there's not that much access to nature with the exception of Central Park and a few more. There's also, those harsh, massive buildings, but this logic of blocks with intersections between each one of them, every few minutes you are in a conflict zone. You would crash if you're driving, or you would run over if you're not paying attention, right? So I felt that there must be a different approach. There must be a different typologies that we can live in that are not just what we are familiar with right now. And I'll explain, right? Like if you live in a city, the chances are that you're either living in a townhouse, a low rise, a mid rise, a high rise, and a skyscraper, right? That's pretty much the options. And if you're living outside of the city, then you are either in a private home, a semi-detached home, or, maybe other forms of like small communities, row house or something like that. But, very limited vocabulary of possibilities within the suburbs and the city, which is where the majority of, the world live in, without forgetting about 1 billion people today living in informal housing all around the world. So understanding that urbanization is not stopping anytime soon. We love cities. We want to live in close proximity to other people. We enjoy the serendipity of city. We enjoy the access to opportunity, the access to culture. But there has been 2 facts that have blew my mind. One is the fact that we are scheduled to double the built environment somewhere between the next 30 to 40 years.
Oh my God.
And second, that we're going to double the land coverage of cities in the next 20 to 30 years.
Oh my God.
And those 2 facts, they're
terrifying.
Just terrifying, right? Like it's so hard to comprehend. You fly over massive cities like New York and LA and Shanghai and Tokyo and so forth, and you're thinking, how are we going to double that amount of infrastructure, that amount of structure within our lifetime? That's just crazy. Every major city in the world is suffering from major traffic, major pollution issues, and many more. And if we're just going to continue, that's just insane. There are many initiatives that are happening, but when I started Supernature, I just could not find a comprehensive approach. So this is one thing. Second, I really wanted to shift away from being a service provider. I think I started my career more of an artist working within the design discipline, creating ideas that I believe in, and slowly you get client, you kind of start to followed the service path, and I just did not enjoy that very well. So I started Supernature as a more of a laboratory to think about new ways of planning, new ways of creating different environment and different experiences. That was the motivation. And I think that the biggest, most significant discovery was when I realized that we don't have to anymore design streets and buildings adjacent to the streets, but we can use nature's most common geometry, which is the cellular logic, and create cellular communities of different density, that I realize, okay, this is a very unique moment in time where we have the technological capabilities, where we have the manufacturing capabilities to accomplish something like that.
I'm fascinated by all of this, but it seems to me that the logic is so sound. Cellular communities makes a lot of sense. But in order for this to really work, we have to convince a lot of minds between now and the doubling of the built world, right?
Absolutely. a lot of minds. Absolutely. And this is exactly the challenge. I mean, The challenge is mostly educational. Actually, two things, Amy. One is we decided very recently to start a foundation, and that's the main focus of the foundation, is to continue to evolve the research that we need to support more and more data and simulation around this logic. And second, to educate about the power of conducting neighborhoods like that. But you're right. I mean, there are so many different stakeholders that needs to be in line with this approach for it to happen. This is why it's not easy, but this is also what's exciting about it.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, it's just enormous in the complexity. Can you distill it down a little bit for us? I mean, you did a great job helping me understand the purpose of the foundation is to evolve the research and to educate. Can you tell me a little bit about like what the moving parts of that are?
Yeah, so let me maybe start by sharing some of the motivations for the cellular logic, and then kind of explain the different ways that we're taking right now to bring it to reality. The first assumption was very basic and very naive, right? Nature does not break things into blocks the way that we do almost everything, right? And if you look at the natural aggregations, whether it's cell under the microscope or, organizations of planetary system, you see this similar geometry, which we call the Voronoi pattern, which is a cellular logic, right? And the first investigation was, what if we applied that same approach to urban planning? Are there any benefits? And we start discovering a few very important elements, and then that list start growing and growing and growing, and it's just does not stop. The first is the fact that we can create urban environments that have the same kind of density as, Manhattan, super dense environment. And we are able to reduce roads and road infrastructure by more than 50%.
Hot damn.
Exactly,
how do you do that?
Right? Exactly,
oh
right?
My God.
I know. It's been a huge turning point for us in understanding that, that fact alone is enormous, right? Because infrastructure is just an insanely, not just costly, but something that if you can reduce and still move around in a more efficient way is great. One of the biggest realizations is not just the reduction of the road and road infrastructure, but also the fact that you actually can get from point A to point B faster and safer. The reason for that is actually quite simple. So if you think of a typical four-way intersection requires that parts of the traffic, parts of the moving parts will stop while other, move. So each intersection is this conflict point, right? There's no natural flow. When you look at how cell formations is organized, you realize that there are no four ways crossing. There's only three ways connections, right? So traffic can flow in a much more efficient way. Now, a traditional four ways crossing have 16 points of collision versus three ways crossing have only 3 points of collision. So it's a much safer place, which also in some cases allows you to reduce traffic signals, which is a major infrastructure and costly elements. So that's one aspect, right?
I have to stop and ask another question. Oh, this is so exciting. I mean, first of all, like roads are right now a necessary evil, but they've always bothered me because they reflect so much sunlight and they block the earth from receiving water and sunlight, and they just don't feel natural.
Right.
But they also create this really hostile acoustic environment. And I'm wondering if cellular logic will make the world sound better.
100%. So, I'm
so excited.
I know that we're not going to even be able to scratch the surface, even if we're going to continue several hours.
Don't do it. I like being naive and excited right now, Dror.
Yeah. No. So let me give you a couple of things. So look at the traditional percentages of a high dense environment, somewhere between 50 to 60% built. I'm talking about land coverage, and the rest is sidewalk and roads, right? When you think of parks in the built environment right now, those parks are areas that were designated as here you cannot build, meaning I've taken away an area that buildings could occupy, and I've deliberately said you can't build on those areas. So whatever those percentages are, they're not part of the grid system in terms of an allowed space, right? When you look at the cellular logic, the way that we've created, we're basically given that 50% reduction in road infrastructure to natural areas that are inside of each one of those cellular communities. So first of all, think about the fact that everybody's facing a park, which is incredible in terms of the quality of life, and therefore also real estate value is higher if we're speaking to the developer mind. But think about the fact that you don't have to cross any road to go to the park. The road is behind you in a way, and the park is there. So think about the safety of kids. Think about the fact that you can let your kids go down to play in the park and not worry that they're crossing any streets. Besides the fact that if you're now starting to connect all of those inner green spaces between supercells with a very simple kind of pedestrian underpath, you get something that looks like a very complex...
Like a neural network?
Neural network, exactly. This is the first time in which pedestrian circulation and vehicular circulation are no longer side by side. I mean, you're typically walking in the same exact path that the vehicles have, with the exception of, one-way streets and things like that you can walk and the car cannot walk. But with the cellular logic, now pedestrians are able to move from a forest to a forest, or from a park to a park, or from, whatever you want to use that natural inner space. It can be urban farming, it could be open space for recreation, for anything. But complete separation from vehicular. So talking about sound, yes, you're going to reduce sounds by the reductions of the road. You're going to reduce sound because cars are no longer having to make so many full stops because they're basically, just flowing. That flow have also that ripple effect of less pedestrians are there, so less interaction of conflict in that regards. The green space function as a buffer, right? Like it's basically muffling the sound. You have a lot more birds and a lot more
bees and squirrels.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not only that, but the breeze rippling through leaves is way more pleasant than a car squeaking to a stop.
Exactly. Yeah, so there's an enormous amount of benefits, right? Like if you think about like flood issues in cities because of the porous nature of concrete and asphalt. Now you have more than 25% of your land coverage be soil. Now we haven't even talked about the health benefit of soil alone, right? So there's tremendous benefits to the fact that you have so much soil, which one provides carbon sink. Second, there are so many studies that shows that, if kids spend an average of 10 minutes stepping on soil, you can reduce so much of the need for, Ritalin and other medications. There are so many studies that shows the value of being physically grounded, putting your feet on natural soil where there's no, layers and layers of concrete underneath you. There's just such a long list of benefits to all of it.
So is this all theoretical, or do you have some built situations that are gathering data right now that prove out these theories, or where are we with this? I say we because I'm on the mission now. I'm very excited about it.
Amazing. Well, first of all, this is how we're building our alliance, right? By making more and more people wanting to see the world shifting towards that type of community creation. And we need as many, supporters and believers as we can to stop urban sprawl. I mean, essentially, we've put this mission, which for me is the biggest aspect, right? Like if we're talking about 30 to 40 years, then we're in a race. We're in a race to make sure that communities are not building more and more Cartesianal communities, but evolving into this bioplanning cellular logic. And we know that it's going to influence the well-being of people. It's going to influence ecology, and it's also going to tremendously influence, the economic aspect, which we can talk about that as well in a separate way. So Supernature's efforts right now is starting to get subdivided into different disciplines within the organization. One is development. We have right now a few projects in Mexico, Costa Rica, and discussions in other Latin American countries, and a couple of discussions in the Middle East. And we basically want to open up as many conversations as we can with large development, whether they are private or governmental or, municipal decisions. We know that as soon as we're going to be able to prove one community like that and not just draw from the data that we're able to support theoretically, but actually measure that success physically, we're going to have much, much, much stronger ability to influence, the world. Obviously, it takes very specific people to be early adopters, people that are willing to take the risk on something that was never built like that before. And that's tough. And that basically requires me traveling to a lot of places around the world and talking to a lot of people. So that's on the development side. There is constant work to improve our communication from modeling perspective, like modeling traffic simulation, modeling construction, modeling certain patterns of behavior that will come as a result of that. And we are now doing all of this kind of under the general umbrella of Supernature, but this is where the foundation is going to come, because we realize that, it's endless how much we need to continue these efforts. I mean, there's just so much to expand. So one of the things that we really like to do is to bring large organizations and large corporations that care about this mission and let them sponsor specific segments of research. For instance, we want to invite large mobility companies like car manufacturers to investigate further the entire mobility aspect of bioplanning. We want to bring large construction organization to provide some more supporting data on construction efficiency. I mean, I didn't speak about that, but there is a tremendous construction efficiency to a cellular logic. You know, when you think of what is the most complex aspect in construction, it's logistics, right? Like you have to phase the construction in such a way that you know exactly how long it takes for, you know, to pour foundation. And as soon as the foundation is ready, you can put the first structural elements. Once the skeleton of the building is done, then you can put your window and fenestration. Then you can start, you know, laying out all of the mechanical elements. I mean, all of this is basically complex logistics of construction. Now, when you are thinking of cellular deployment, think about a kitchen. There is a round kitchen where you don't need to move anywhere. Like your sink is at arm reach on one side, your fridge is at arm reach, you know, behind you, your stove is on the left, and you don't move so much, right? Like you can cook a lot faster like this. So that's probably the easiest way to talk about like building cellular communities, right? Like you have your deployment center in the middle and you have your crane or any other equipment basically providing all around. What is the exact percentage of reduction in time on several systems? We have a lot of research to do around that, right? Like if you build in concrete, under X amount of stories, you can save 20%. If you're building average of 20 stories, you save that percentage and so forth. Of course, we want to get to a future where construction sites are made with only modular components and ideally only regenerative material, but we're far from that still.
Yeah, I can imagine this cellular logic, too, has to be indigenous to the land and climate, too, and the kind of weather systems that it will have to deal with and all of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, of course, you know, there are different climate conditions requires different architectural needs, you know, tropical setting, desert settings, all of those are nuances that are very specific to where you work. I mean, we haven't even touched on talking about regulations and zonings, which is probably one of the biggest challenges in the world today. But I'm somehow optimistic in that regards because I'm thinking, okay, everybody's understanding that, you know, zoning needs to change and zoning are being changed rapidly all over the world because our life have changed. We're no longer going to one area to shop for groceries, and that, you know, everybody understanding today that this aspect of mixed use is the most logical way to construct communities, right? Like this idea that I can go downstairs and get all of my necessity in a walking distance, what we call the 15-minute city. So yeah, there's a lot on the regulatory side. But what we are providing right now is so different, is so new that we can only operate in places that are open to having a very, very kind of close dialogue with us on zoning changes. And if the authorities, if the municipalities are not open to that, then we're just not there at the moment.
I do want to ask you a little bit about you personally, but even though I know that Supernature Labs is probably the bulk of your life right now, before I do, I would love to know, for anybody who's listening who wants to learn more or get involved or even support, where would I send them?
Yeah, thank you. We need a lot of support. On our website, on supernaturelabs.com, we have a couple of different emails for different engagement and involvement. And at this point, we're looking for different team members that we're searching for. We are looking for developers and municipalities that are interested in exploring this approach. We're looking for supporters for the foundations. There's a whole tech initiative that at the moment we put aside because we realize the complexity of the tech platform that we want to build, and we want to do it with a partnership with a strong technology company. So yeah, there's, I mean, we're talking about the built environment, right? Like it includes everything.
You know, my first question for you, Dror, is this is an enormous undertaking. I'm certain that nobody would undertake something like this if you weren't absolutely 100% passionate about it, which is what we need, I think, to shift the paradigm of building communities so dramatically. If I could bring it back to you, my question is, how is this process changing you? Where are you growing throughout this? And where are you also finding within yourself resistance that you need to break down?
Wow, that's a very important question. You know, one of the things that I realize, and I'm keep on reminding myself, is that this is much bigger than me, my ideas, and my creation. You know, coming from being an artist where you control the end result, you know, it's clear to me that this effort is about aggregating a lot of different aspects, different players, different opinions, different approaches. I need to really be comfortable not being comfortable. There's so many topics and so many aspects that I'm just starting to gain knowledge about. And the more we dive into each one of those aspects, you realize that it's just endless. You know, there's just so much more and more and more to dive into. And I need to be very, very comfortable in running an organization that evolve in this very liquid-like process, right? It's impossible to just control it all.
Well, it seems to me it's going to have to almost grow in a cellular way. And as one person, if you try to manage or be knowledgeable or even try to control the whole ecosystem, that would restrict it in ways that aren't healthy. I can feel like, how do I nurture this thing and give it as much support and nourishment as possible?
Right.
Without imposing myself in such a way that I end up accidentally restricting it.
Absolutely. You know, and it's a lot of kind of self-work, because it's very hard to prioritize when you having a hard time to assess the importance of certain aspect.
Oh, yeah, of course it would be.
So,
you don't even know what's important or not yet.
Exactly. And I think that it's a very fine balance, because there's certain things that are, you know, decisions that you have to make yourself, decisions that you have to do as a group. After running my own design practice for, you know, close to 20 years, you realize that this is a whole different beast. This is a whole different way of evolving. It's a very interesting challenge.
Well, more power to you, Dror. I hope that you grow into an enormous, thriving tree within a really healthy ecosystem.
Thank you so much.
This is so fascinating. I feel like I'm right on that space where I know enough to be excited and not enough to be daunted quite yet. But I'm thrilled that you're undertaking this adventure/mission, and in the process, you can't help but bring people together under a collective movement. That's what it's going to take, a really large-scale movement.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure, Amy.
Hey, thanks for listening. To see images of Dror's work and read the show notes, click the link in the details of this episode on your podcast app, or go to cleverpodcast.com, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. Subscribe to Clever on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if what you heard today resonated with you, would you please consider giving us a rating and a review to help others find these inspiring stories? We really appreciate it. We also love chatting with you on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Clever Podcast, and you can find me at Amy Devers. Clever is hosted and produced by me, Amy Devers, with editing by Rich Straffolino, production assistance from Ilana Nevins and Anushka Stefan, and music by L1011.